The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Senator Ryan McDougle here with us today, the chairman of the Virginia Senate Republican Caucus. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Woody. Appreciate you having me on.
Great. Tell us, how are your constituents doing in the Essex area now?
Well, we had a pretty rough week in my district. We had the tornadoes that came through on Wednesday, and going down and looking at the damage, it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It's absolutely horrific. We are just so fortunate that we had no fatalities in our area, but people lost everything they had in Essex and across the river in Richmond County, and so it has been very devastating. But the community has been absolutely amazing. They've gotten together, churches, local officials. We're very fortunate to have a great board chairman who is well versed in emergency management, and sheriff that has done a great job, and they've really come together. But it was striking to me, just showing how much that people care and what they wanted to do. My little girl, who's 4 years old, her name's Reagan, as we were talking about the storms, because there was some reports where we live that there was one, and so she was hiding in the pantry with her dog and Robin, and she got together a bunch of her stuffed animals, her bears and one of her dolls, to take for the kids who lost theirs. And those types of things have been going on throughout the community, giving up what they have so the people that lost everything have something. There'll be a lot of work for us to do, and we're working with the Governor's Office, Secretary of Public Safety, to try to prepare our request for aid for people who were not insured, and there'll be cleanup for a long time, but the community has been amazing, and I'm proud of our constituents and our friends and family members, because they have come together like they should, like the way it ought to be, and they've done a great job. But it was not any better this week. We had a horrific fire at a marina in Urbana, so we've been going through some challenging times, and we're trying to find ways to make sure people that had tremendous losses, that we do what we can to at least make them partly whole.
Now, absent this recent tragedy, how has your district fared economically over the past few years?
We've seen some signs of things increasing. We have a lot of military involvement, private sector supporting Dahlgren, supporting AP Hill, but we have a lot of creative and innovative individuals in our district, and they are widely varied by the types of skills they have, for being watermen to being farmers to being high tech and entrepreneurial. So just a lot of great individuals who are doing some positive things, and I think as a result we're doing better. We're always looking for some better direction from our friends across the Potomac, but we're forging ahead. But these tragic events really show you how, as a community, we can come together and we can work to make lives better for our friends, families, and neighbors.
Tell us a little bit about this initiative called Go Virginia. What is its objective, and what do you hope comes out of it?
Well, this was really an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas. We've been trying to look at economic development and what it takes to locate new companies, expand new companies, and the relationship between local governments and private business, getting areas ready. People think that businesses just come in and pick a spot, and they put their business there and start manufacturing or start their high-tech development. But it really, you have to lay the groundwork, and that starts with having infrastructure, things like broadband, things like water and sewer and the power resources. And putting all that together oftentimes takes a regional approach. And Go Virginia's effort is to put in place that regional approach. So instead of one county or one town or city doing it on their own, let's partner up business and local government on a regional directive and make sure that we can put the best opportunity to expand existing businesses and bring in new. And we think that this is going to be the model going forward that will put new jobs in place, put new opportunities in place, and we're excited about its prospects. We dealt with it on the Finance Committee moments before I arrived with you, and it will shortly be going to the governor's desk.
Great. Now I understand that the beauty of this is that this was brought to you by the private sector, and it's going to be a ground-up approach.
It really is, and the private sector has said, hey, there are certain areas that are ready to go, and they're ready to take new business, but if we had a regional approach, we could do a better job of putting in place the infrastructure needed for those businesses to come in. And I think it's a great idea, and it shows how when we work together, we can achieve great things. And sometimes that working together doesn't stop at town lines or county lines or city lines. And oftentimes it's not the government, it's the private sector coming up with that innovation.
Now you serve on a number of committees, including courts of justice, and I understand there's a hot issue around the hearsay rule.
Well, as we look at things in the Courts of Justice Committee, a lot of different topics come about. As a former prosecutor, I have a particular focus on things that make our community safer, our children safer. And having a 4-year-old, I'm much more focused on that today than I was prior to that. But the Supreme Court case went through this summer that allows hearsay for what we call a tender years exception, a child under 13 who has been the victim of or witnessed a violent or sexual criminal activity that would occur. And with the passage of the bill now through the House and Senate on the way to the governor, what this will do is give prosecutors a tool in the case that it'll be used in that is sometimes the most egregious and difficult to deal with is a situation where a predator confesses, gives a confession to law enforcement, but the victim was so young that there's no corroborating evidence or that evidence was destroyed. Now we'll be able to get in some evidence if that child told their teacher or daycare worker and you have a confession. There are very limited uses of this because it is hearsay, and we want to make sure it's truthful evidence that's coming into court. But this one will enable us to put away some very bad people that we weren't able to put away in the past. But we put in a lot of protections, and we spend a lot of time trying to make sure those protections are right. So it's another opportunity for us to be able to make sure that we're not getting people we ought not to be, but making sure bad people are not around to harm our children.
Continuing on children and youngsters, you also have some legislation dealing with the accreditation of public schools.
This has been a passion of mine for a number of years. My mom was a school teacher. I went to public schools, and you really see the impact that individuals can have on the system. And if the school system is not performing at a high level, the negative impact that can have on kids as well. So it's not just the positive impact, but when they're not operating the way they should, it doesn't have that positive impact and it turns out to be a negative. We tried some things to deal with schools that were failing, not accredited for year after year after year, and we were unsuccessful in that. And there were a number of us that had some very strong opinions, and we came up with a very creative approach, one that I still think was a good approach. But we had to shift our focus because we had no success. And in working with Secretary Holton and her team in the governor's office, we came up with a second approach that is going forward. This one's more modest, but it gives the State Board of Education some teeth and some additional abilities for those failing schools to put in place plans that last not just for one school year, but for 2 or 3 school years. And we think with this new approach, it's also going to give us the ability to say, if you're not doing those things to change your school system, to make it better for the children, then it's going to give the ability for us to say, well, we're going to do some things different with the funding that's going to that system if it's not working. We worked on this, and Secretary Holton and I have had some disagreements with how to get to helping our kids in the best way. And we said, let's team together and come up with a solution. And we think that this is one of those steps forward, and that bill is moving on to the governor's desk as well.
Now, the State Board of Education, in relation to local school districts, was also the subject of a constitutional amendment that failed, I believe, this year in terms of charter schools. Talk to us about the pros and cons around that issue.
Whenever you're dealing with schools, people have very passionate beliefs. There are some that believe passionately that the individual localities should make all the decisions, and we have those protections in place in the Constitution. And that works well for most schools. Like some schools in my district are the best in the state, and we put them up against public or private. They do a great job. But not all schools are successful, and charter schools are one of the ways that communities come together, put in place a charter for school, but it still is operated as a state school. Some areas, the school boards just say no. They don't consider any applications, they don't go forward. So there was an effort made through a constitutional amendment to have the State Board of Education reviewing some of those charters and then putting those schools into place. That amendment did not pass, so it'll not become law. It will not be on anybody's ballot to vote in November. But it does show some of the conversations we're having about schools. Historically, it has always been that the government is the best way and the only way to provide education. But now people are starting to look and say, are there new ways? Are there creative ways? Are there ways that are made available through technology? And we're going to continue to have those discussions because some parents, rightly so, are very focused on making sure their kids have the best opportunities regardless of which county, town, or city they live in across the Commonwealth. And as legislators, I think we have a duty and responsibility to make sure that the best options and choices are in place for families, and to make sure that we're providing that public education for all our children. So it's a difficult area. People have strong feelings on both sides, but I think as we continue to go forward, that creativity will make us better.
And as I understand it, neighboring jurisdictions such as Maryland and the District of Columbia far exceed the number of charter schools than the Commonwealth now.
That's my understanding as well. And so as we look at what other states do, sometimes they do it better, sometimes they do it worse, but we're looking at charter schools. That avenue is not going to pass this year, but a bill we just dealt with this morning is virtual schools and having the ability for kids to learn where maybe they don't have a teacher that specializes in a certain language or certain mathematical expertise. They can get that education they want now regardless of where they live. So technology is changing. Our thought processes on education are changing as well, and making sure that kids have an opportunity, and we're no longer bound by just our geographic area and where we live. And we're going to continue to have these discussions. Education is one of the most important things we do, and so we need to make sure we are looking at innovation and creativity, but we also want to make sure that we're doing that in a measured approach, because a lot of the things we're doing today, we're doing well. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to get it right, because you only have one opportunity to educate your child.
So you're looking for a lot more choice and the potential for competition to improve the opportunities for kids.
And we also think that a rising tide raises all ships. So if we can put in place those things to raise up the lowest of school levels, that competition is going to make our higher school performing districts do even better. So that it's a system-wide approach and not just one particular area.
What about encouraging more certifications through our high schools in conjunctions with our community colleges?
We have seen what we look for from employees, what the business sector looks for, and what opportunities are in place change over time. It used to be a 4-year liberal arts education was the end-all be-all, and now it is not. That is something that most employers require, but we're also finding that we need those individuals who have specific training and skills to be able to do things, to be able to work on electronics, to be able to work on mechanical operations. And the community colleges are a perfect place for us to provide that training, that expertise for some great paying jobs, particularly in my district. And we are trying to meld that between our high schools and our community college. So many of our kids are having opportunities to go to high school and get some of that education at community college as well. It makes them more productive in our communities. It makes it more opportunities for businesses to locate in our areas when they have those kids that have that education. And it's a great way for them to learn and have high-paying jobs when they come out of school. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, there's some numbers that the governor, I think, suggested in his State of the Commonwealth address regarding cybersecurity. 17,000 jobs now available at a starting annual salary of $80,000.
Technology is changing the way we do business in every part of our life. And part of that is protecting that information that goes into the cloud or goes onto your server or mainframe, wherever you are. And it takes a lot of creativity, a lot of experience to be able to protect that information, that data. We think of it in a governmental protection, and that certainly is very important. But the really demand in the area are private businesses, private entities that have to be able to protect the information they have of their clients, their customers. And it is a growing area, and we've done some creative things in Virginia, and we are looking to do more, and that provides more opportunities for our kids.
And changing technology, especially through the internet, has offered opportunities for people to engage in fantasy sports. And I understand that you had legislation this session dealing with consumer protections around that issue.
One of the things that we find that many Virginians are doing, over 1 million, it's numbers probably much higher than that we know of, are playing fantasy sports. So it is legal federally, and many people in Virginia do it. Fantasy football, fantasy baseball. And we wanted to make sure that if people are engaging in those activities, we put in place some consumer protections so that they know when they're playing those sports, making those games, that they're doing it in a safe environment where they know that the people hosting the games are not just allowing their employees to play or the family members of their employees, making sure if they paid an entry fee that entry fee is protected and not going somewhere where they couldn't get access to it, and making sure that the providers are not letting kids under the age of 18 participate. And so we put through legislation, it is now being considered by the governor, that puts in place those consumer protections and make sure that there are audits of the funds and the accounts as well. It's a legal sport federally, and we want to make sure that Virginians were protected playing it, since so many of them in Virginia are.
And we're so used to taking chances, if you will. I mean, we do it every day to the extent people delve into the stock market or even the real estate market. But both of those markets are regulated in terms of consumer protections.
And we didn't put in these vast regulations, right, but we did put in some pretty basic protections that most people that were playing would assume were there, but there was nothing before. It was wide open, and now we've made sure those protections are in place.
Talk to us about your view of how the 2013 Transportation Funding Bill has been implemented.
So we go through transportation. It is a challenging area because we have areas that with diverse views and diverse needs across Virginia. We have Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, which have a tremendous amount of people. Northern Virginia in particular, an economic hub. Hampton Roads has a lot of water, which you have to traverse. And we have Southwest Virginia and South Side, which are in desperate need of economic development and need the transportation arteries to get there. So how do we create a system that prioritizes the best place for us to put our transportation dollars? And we tried to come up with that in 2013 through legislation that moved through. So we are now in the implementation process of that, and we're trying to factor in congestion, economic development, safety to come up with the top priorities. And we have some areas in our district like the Norris Bridge, which traverses the Rappahannock River, that is a challenge for many of my constituents, and I hear about it frequently. How do we elevate the need to look at either replacement or refurbishing in those areas? And the legislation was put in place to try to deal with that. So we're now at the beginning of that implementation process moving forward. We will continue to tweak it and try to make sure that it's done effectively, but that beginning implementation will go in place over the next couple years. Transportation is a topic we will always discuss. We'll never fix it. It'll never be perfect. We'll have to continue to work on it because and in Virginia it is so challenging because our state is so diverse. One of our great assets is a real challenge when it comes to transportation.
And of course, the other real challenge, and for consumers it's been great, and for tourism it's been great that the gas prices have gone down significantly, but that reduces the amount of revenue that's been raised through that bill.
It does, particularly in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, because of some of the regional components of that bill. And 3 years ago, nobody anticipated that we would be paying less than $2 a gallon for gas, and frequently now I see it less than $1.50 as I drive around my district, and it is a blessing and a curse all at the same time. So whenever you have those changes, we work to try to make the best of the situations. And so I know many of my constituents, including my mom, who is involved in transportation of plants, are very happy that that cost is down at this point.
What's the significance of the Commonwealth Transportation Board?
Commonwealth Transportation Board was set up long before I was ever elected to try to be an impartial decision maker of what projects are best so that they don't get caught in political dynamics. Local board supervisors have recommendations, different members of the legislature have recommendations, but the Transportation Board is made up of our regional components and statewide at-large members, and they make the actual decisions on which projects move forward at what pace. And so it's a very important appointment power of the governor, one that is probably certainly on equal to the State Board of Education in the decision making that they have. And it's one of our systems that we put in place to not determine how much money is spent, but once we allocate the money through the legislative process, where specifically those projects go forward. And they create what we call a 6-year plan typically, where we try to look over 6 years what projects we would like to put in place.
So they would apply the criteria you mentioned earlier, for example, on congestion, mitigation, safety, economic development, and those things?
They're one of the key components in how all that gets put in place logistically.
As a matter of fact, there's been a compromise on a very controversial project in Northern Virginia, I-66 inside the Beltway. I take it they were involved in that?
Well, that project's a little bit different because it's a public-private project. And so the question is, how do we fund that? Do we allow individuals who are not in high occupancy vehicles, have 3 or more people in the car, to be able to ride on I-66 inside the Beltway or not? And the compromise that came up with was you would, but they have to pay more than somebody who doesn't. It's somewhat of the concept of the hot lanes that we've used on 95, but we need additional funding to be able to expand the road because we have more people than we have space for them to move. And this is one of the creative ideas that we think will save taxpayers overall in the state money going forward.
Now, you've got constituents in Spotsylvania County, and I assume some of them may work in Northern Virginia or even D.C. Have you heard from them about the hot lanes on 95 and how that's worked out?
I have, and it's not just Spotsylvania, but it's also Caroline, King George, Westmoreland, Hanover. A lot of people end up having business in Northern Virginia or Washington for one reason or another. Some people absolutely love the hot lanes and think that they have reduced their congestion, thus the amount of time and traffic. But we do hear some people complain about the cost, and there are trade-offs with anything. I think at this point, it was the best option that we had available to us. But as we go forward, we always need to continue to reevaluate those decisions that we've made to ensuring that they're the best ones going forward. We really do need to continue down the HOV or hot lanes farther south, and there's some effort, but getting it across the river proves to be very expensive, and that's where some of our congestion problems are right now, and we're going to continue to work to try to find solutions.
Now, another compromise that surprised everybody, I think, was the compromise on concealed carry permits and reciprocity. Talk to us about that issue.
That was probably the issue that I heard about more from my constituents than any other, and that was the Attorney General's decision to stop reciprocity for individuals who have valid concealed carry permits. We worked to come up with a solution. Many people had different ways to come up with that solution, and at the end of the day, we came up with a package of bills. One bill would restore the reciprocity, so if you have a concealed weapon permit, you would be able to drive to the states where we have reciprocity, and your permit would still be valid, would not make you a criminal if you drove out of Virginia. One that would allow individuals to get voluntary background checks at gun shows, which is something that a number of people wanted to be able to do, and now will have the opportunity to. And one that made sure that if you were subject to a valid permanent protective order, which meant that the judge has decided that you are a danger to a family member, that before you could not transport a firearm or purchase a firearm, and this would add in you can no longer possess a firearm as well. So all the directions that we went, I think, were very logical in the compromise, and there were something for many people to be happy about on both sides. But I think it was a substantial victory for those who are supportive of Second Amendment rights.
So if I'm not a federally licensed vendor and I'd like to sell something to you, I can now get the assistance of state law enforcement to run a background check.
You can, and for individuals who are selling any sort of volume of guns at a gun show, you have to be federally licensed. But what it does is for the individual who wants to sell their heirloom that they inherited, now they can make sure that the person they're selling it to has a clean background check.
Well, thank you for being here, Senator Ryan McDougle.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.